All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Jones. I'm coming to you live from St. Boniface Albertson Research Center here in the Youth BioLab. We're in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In this weekly live stream, we're trying to have conversations with people from all around our building here. Learn a little bit more about the work and the research, the science that goes on at St. B. But really the goal of these conversations is really to meet some of the people who do the science. We've got Angelica and Megan watching the chat, and I'll try and keep my eye on that as well. If you do have questions for our guests today, be sure to throw them in there and we can get to them. We want to keep this a conversation between everyone. Sometimes we throw some complicated words at you, so maybe you want to know what's going on. Feel free to jump in the chat and get in touch with us as we go. So I'm going to bring on our guest for today. Today we've got joining us Anne Mendonca. I just learned she's a PhD student now. As long as I've known Anne, Anne's been a good friend of our lab. She's always willing to come down and share the things that she does. And, when I first met her, she was a master's student here. And Anne, you just said you've just transitioned into your PhD?
Yeah, I transferred to a PhD in May 2020.
May 2020. So you've been at St. B now for how many years?
Well, I've been there since January 2019 was when I started my master's, which is now part of my PhD program. But the first time I was at St. Boniface was back in 2016, because at that time I was working with Dr. Akma too, and our lab just moved to St. Boniface from Fort Garry. That was in 2016.
Yeah, so you're in Dr. Akama's lab. So Dr. Akama, he's for those people who don't know out there, a lot of our labs here at the Research Center are University of Manitoba labs. We do have some Canadian government labs and a few others mixed in, but for the most part, we're University of Manitoba. So like Dr. Akama, he's a professor with the U of M. He's part of our Canadian Center for Agri-Food Research in Health and Medicine, one of our big divisions here. And yeah, so he kind of runs the lab, and you've been one of his students even since the move from Fort Garry. I know Dr. Akama, every time I talk to him or meet one of his students, he has like a million different projects going on. I find it it's kind of hard to say exactly what your lab does because you seem to do so many things. If you were able to describe what's Dr. Akama's what is the lab really trying to do? Can you explain it?
Yeah, so we do have several different projects, but they are all about lipids, fats essentially. And what we look at is what happened to these fats when they are in your body, because they get converted to some molecules that they have really potent action in our body. So that's kind of what we look at. What happens with these? In lots of different scenarios, lots of different, um, yeah.
Right. So everyone's heard of fats, obviously, and this is we'll get into this a little more when we start looking at you've shared some of your research, the stuff that you do in the lab with us. Can you tell us a little bit how did you end up in research? Tell us a little. I always like to kind of introduce our guests and share a little about how you ended up here, because maybe we've got some high school students out there watching who are kind of oh, maybe I'm interested in science or medicine or nutrition or health. How did you end up where you are right now?
Yeah, so I was lucky that in my second term as an undergrad student, and that was back in Brazil, I I got a chance to work in research. So I started really early in university. And in that second term in university, I was working in a project related to nutritional biochemistry. And then after that, I had other opportunities to work in other research. It opened up a few doors. So I
Yeah. And when
then
you say undergrad, just sometimes kids might not know what we're talking about. Like undergrad, so when you go after high school, you might do a Bachelor of Science, you might do a Bachelor of Arts. Normally we call that an undergraduate degree. So if you're doing your bachelor's, right, that's an undergraduate, and then you could move on and do your master's after that, and then move into your PhD after that. And you said you started in Brazil doing your undergrad?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I started there doing my undergraduate program in nutrition. And then in my second term, it was in my first year in university, and I had a chance to be in a lab, and it was really nice. And then I had other opportunities that were in different research after that. I worked with like cultural recipes and assessing their nutritional content. And then I worked a little bit with knowledge translation and making podcasts and videos about scientific papers after that. And then I had the chance to come to Canada. So this was a program called Science Without Borders that
Oh.
I applied to.
Yeah, it's kind of
And
funny. You're our second. Rebecca was on last week from Brazil, and here's yet another graduate student here at the Research Center from Brazil. How do you all
yeah,
end up in Winnipeg? So what's this
yeah.
Science Without Borders about?
Rebecca is actually a very good friend of mine. We came the same year
Okay.
in the same the exact same year. Yeah. In this program, you could apply to go almost anywhere in the world. Um, and and then I was obviously fascinated by that, and by like how research could take me to different places. So I just started getting more and more into research. And when I came here, I was really interested in doing something that would get me a publication out of, and like doing research for more than just that summer term that they
Mhm.
asked us
Yeah.
to.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I think that's also a nice illustrates a nice path to research that when people are doing that bachelor's degree or that undergraduate degree, take those opportunities to do that summer position in a lab and go speak to professors, because it can really show you, what benchtop research is all about. It really shows you what the science is about. And some people could just go through that bachelor's degree and just do their courses, do their classes, and never really get a taste of what real research is like. And maybe for some people that they realize that's not what they want to do. Maybe for other people like you do realize, oh, that is what I'm interested in, and I see a future for myself in this. Because even with something like, I would imagine, even something like nutrition, there's people are interested in all different aspects of
Oh yeah.
nutrition, right? Like whether it's diet and just a general interest. But there's a lot of lab work, like actual bench work, that goes on to really understand like how nutrition works, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then at that point, I had been in so many different research types already that I kind of had an idea of what I would like the most. I
Mm.
was in my third year then. So I just looked at the professors, and I contacted a few of them. And I just looked for whatever would be what would be more closely related to what I had more interest on.
Yeah. No, and I think Dr. Alchemist Lab's a good one to end up in. He's a very interesting guy. He's got a lot of things going on, like we said. And then, for those out there thinking, as you move into what we call a graduate program in your master's or your PhD, then you kind of get to carve out, not what your professor, your boss is telling you to research. Like you do get to kind of carve out your own path and find
Yeah,
the things that you really want to spend your time studying. And I mean, that's a lot of the fun of the work that we get to do is now you can really use your own interests that you've had since you were younger and
yeah,
dig in on your own piece of some sort of puzzle. So you shared this is a first author paper, and for people who don't know what that means, it's when we do things in our labs, when we learn new things, we share it with the world. Like that's really what we're trying to do here is learn new things and share them. And the way we do that is we publish things in scientific journals out there. We publish these papers so other scientists around the world who are interested in similar things can see what we're doing and see what we've learned. And it's this big global sharing of information. So I'm going to pull that up and just I want to share the title with any viewers out there, so so they can see a little bit about what we're talking about. So when we publish these things, they'll get published and they'll have a title and they'll list all the people that worked on a specific project. So I'll share this with everyone. This is just kind of the title and all the different people that are working on Anne. So Anne's the first author on this paper. You can see her there, and that really means like this is your work, right? Like this is your big project. Is this your first author paper?
Yes, it was a result of the work I did through Science Without Borders with Dr. Akma. So this was really my undergrad research.
Yeah, wrapped in with some of the work that we do. I see a few names that I recognize from around the research center. And this would have been in a journal. It's called Prostaglandins, Leukotrienes, and Essential Fatty Acids. I don't know what all that means, but you do. This isn't my area. So, when I read a title like this, the distinct effects of dietary ALA, EPA, and DHA on rat adipose oxylipins vary by depot location. And probably anyone viewing out there, when they look at something like this, it probably doesn't, it's a little confusing. So like I had to spend some time earlier, familiarizing myself with this, and it's really actually quite interesting. And I found, this relates to a few things. So maybe we can walk through this together and you can make sure that I've got this right. So the first thing that jumped out at me is this ALA, EPA, and DHA, these things here. Let me just get back to my page. So people might have heard of these. Like I knew I'd heard of these, but I had to refresh my mind on what they were. Those people are pretty familiar with those. What do we normally call those?
Those are omega-3 fatty acids.
Right. So I think most people would have heard the term omega-3s before, right? And I just brought in, as I was thinking about this morning, there's lots of places that, just even in your regular diet, you might eat omega-3s. I just brought these in because, I take some of these every day, right? I take some fish oil at breakfast. It gives you really horrible burps for the rest of the day. Some cod liver oil. But what you see on these packages is this has some DHA in it, right? So that's some of those omega-3s. And this is what was interesting. Like I think a lot of people out there have heard of these things and have heard that they're healthy for you.
Yeah, those are the main 3 different types of omega-3s. So ALA is the one that you would find like in flax oil mostly. Okay. And then EPA and DHA are the 2 different kinds that are in fish oil, but we just tested them separately to see what happened.
Right. And so this is the kind of cool stuff is that, we kind of think that these things are healthy, but people like you and Dr. Akama, like we want to know, well, how do they work, right? Like how are they healthy for you? And I don't know, do we know which is more healthy? And we don't always know these things. And so there's so much to learn. So here's what, let's look at our next couple of words here. People know what rats are, but they might not know this word adipose. And so what does that mean for us, this word adipose?
That is the fat tissue in our body.
Okay, so when we say, you might talk about fat cells, those would be adipose cells, or the fat, the fat that we carry on our body, that's adipose tissue, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of
fat tissue, and then there are different locations of it. So
so when you say depot location, what are some of those locations?
Yeah, so we took a fat from like around the kidneys. It's called perirenal fat. We took a subcutaneous fat, that it's the one that it's under your skin. And we took mesenteric fat, that would be kind of like around your organs.
Right.
Um, and gonadal. Gonadal would be around your reproductive organs, your ovaries, for example.
Yeah. So like, I think we all know, we've got fat on our body, but we've also got fat inside our body, around our organs, and sometimes
Yeah.
even in our organs themselves. It's not just all the stuff that hangs off our belly. There's right, there's all kinds of other fat tissue around. Um, and I guess part of it is like we want to know, well, the thing I don't know, the thing that interests me about it too, that I've learned over the last bunch of years is it doesn't just hang off your body. It does stuff, right? Like it's not just this big blob of fat that you're trying to lose. It's actually an important part of your body and helps in a lot of situations, but can also change in a lot of disease situations, right? Like it's a living, breathing organ, right? It does stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I read this through some of this, these words come up. The next word that jumps out is this oxylipins, and this will kind of get us into this idea. So tell me if I'm right here, because this is what I understand. So oxylipins. So if I eat my fish oil here, right? If I eat my fish oil, I'm getting some EPA and DHA, but
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily, like if I eat that, that doesn't necessarily do something to me. My body converts it into oxylipins. Is that so? Like this stuff becomes this stuff,
Yes.
and
Yes, that's right.
and these things. So oxylipins are active molecules that then carry on some effect for my body.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
eat my
And
fish oil.
just a very simple example, like when you take an aspirin or an Advil, you're actually blocking certain oxylipins, and that
Oh,
makes your pain go away and makes your fever go away. So that's how potent these molecules are.
right. So people have heard of like, kids would have heard of hormones and things like that. They're little molecules like insulin or testosterone or something. Those are little molecules that can send signals around your body. Is
Yeah.
oxylipins the same kind of thing? Like it can actually signal to other parts in your body?
Yeah, they are actually hormone-like molecules, so they're similar to hormones.
So I guess, I look at this and I go, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Um, I guess we're trying to figure out then when I eat my fish oil, what's actually happening? Where does it go? What does it do? Does it turn into oxylipins? Is it doing that in my belly? Is it doing that in my mesentery? Is it doing that? Like, where is it? Is that what we're looking at here in this paper?
Yeah, so when you eat your fish oil there, your body is gonna absorb that, and part of it will go and be stored in your fat cells and fat tissues, but a lot of it will also go and they form the membrane of your cells. So all our cells, they are surrounded by an envelope of fat.
Mm-hmm.
And this fat, it reflects the composition of your diet. So depending on the type of fats you eat in your diet, the layer around your cells, they will change their composition. And from the composition of this cell membrane, um, then that's the portion that gets released and converted into oxylipins. And it can happen really in every, like, in any tissue. So we've studied lots of different tissues in Akuma lab.
And could that be like, I mean, we use the word fats, and most people might know the idea that there's good fats and there's bad fats. So are you saying, I haven't really thought about that either, but so are you saying in that cell membrane, if you eat a lot of the bad fats, that they can end up globbed onto the outside of your cells too? Like, is that kind of how this works?
Yeah, that will influence a little bit how oxylipins are formed. The oxylipins itself, they are formed from the kind of what they call more of the good fats, because they are called the polyunsaturated fats. So it will be your omega-3 and your omega-6s that will actually produce oxylipins. But it has been shown that the saturated fat that you eat, or the monounsaturated, that would be more like your olive oil, they can actually also interfere with how oxylipins are formed, because Yeah, because of how much, then how much will be there, right?
So if you eat the good fats, you're going to get some good oxylipins. Why are they good? Like, what do they actually do for us that we think is good? I don't know anything about this, so you'll have to learn.
So the ones from, especially the ones from fish oil, the EPA and the DHA ones, they can turn into molecules that they resolve inflammation. So they can be really helpful in our body. And there's a competition in the body between like the omega-6 and the omega-3s, from which ones get metabolized and produced and turned into oxylipins. So once you have more omega-3s, then they kind of take over and there's less omega-6 being produced.
And you use the word, you talked a little bit about inflammation, right? So these oxylipins, they, if you eat your good oils, your flaxseed, your omega-3s, if you eat lots of fish, lots of oily fish like your salmon or even your pickerels, things like that, you'll have lots of these good oxylipins going around and helping reduce inflammation. And I think most people, this is something I've had to wrap my head around a little over the last bunch of years. In the last 10 or 20 years, scientists have started looking at inflammation in so many different diseases. So we're not really just talking about, oh, you get a bruise and it gets inflamed.
Yeah.
We're talking about, inflammation seems to pop up in cancer in ways, and in heart disease. How does it relate to fat? Like, what are some of the diseases associated here where we're worried about inflammation?
Yeah, so there are lots of like cardiovascular, there are other metabolic diseases too that are associated with that. But these molecules, they do a lot. Like they are also involved in like wound healing and like making your immune system stronger. So there's really a
even
lot.
things like diabetes and obesity too are a lot of inflammation, right?
But they are, yes. But they're also like very new. So there is not much we know about how oxylipins work. What do they exactly do in our body? We're just starting to learn all these things.
Yeah, and that's the really cool part about the work. Reading in this, one of the big problems we talk about a lot in science is that so much of it is done in male rats too, right? And that's a neat part of the or male animals or even just males. And it's one of these things that I found really cool about your paper is that you kind of threw the sex and gender into there too, because we know like male and female bodies sometimes deal with nutrients differently, deal with energy differently, deal with hormones differently. What can you tell us a little bit about that in this study?
It was a really interesting study because we saw that the sex differences we found, they were related to the diet. So, or rats that received the EPA, the oxylipins were much higher in the female rats. But for the rats that received DHA, they were much higher in the male rats.
Huh. And was that location by location, like different in different locations too? Like, because you were looking at different locations?
It was generally like this, where we saw the most sex differences was in gonadal adipose, which makes sense because it's the different part of the body for males and females.
Yeah.
But there were also differences like that in subcutaneous tissue and a little bit in mesenteric, but not so much in perirenal. So the fat around your kidneys acted quite differently.
Yeah, interesting. No, there's so much. It just opens up so many more questions every step you take. Now that you're looking at these certain fat depots, are there other places where things are different too? And is age, like there's so many different things to try and understand. I just wanted to share one more slide. I just found this confusing as I was looking at your work here. And I just wanted to show folks, like, here's some of the data, like some of the actual data that your paper brought out. And this isn't going to make sense to anybody just looking at it, but basically what Anne did, you can feed this diet to some rats, or you could do the same thing to people, and then you can have a look at their fat and see is this whole thing here, is this whole list of different oxylipins, like, is that what this is showing us?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different oxylipins, yes.
So even like if you take your DHA that's in my fish oil or whatever, it can be turned into all these different oxylipins that can go off and do all these different things all over the place.
Yes, exactly. So you see that the DHA diet increases them the most because they're the big arrows there.
Yeah, no, it's really crazy to think, and then you have to figure out, okay, well, what are those things actually doing, right? Like that's our whole next step, and you know, that's one of the really fun parts of science, is that everything you learn there, you realize there's so much more I can learn. So I'll ask you that question as we wrap up here. You know, so that's one study you did, you know, as you came out of your undergrad into your master's work. Where does this take you next? Like, what are you working on right now?
So right now I'm really trying to understand, like we're trying to understand why those sex differences happen because of the diet, right? What made those differences happen differently in males and females, and that happened in the heart as well. So I'm looking at the heart now, and seeing how does the diet really impact sex differences.
Cool. So that, I mean, that's great for those rats. How will this in the end, like, where do you see this kind of work fitting into helping people down the road? Like, where do you see this kind of fitting in? Will it help me figure out, you know, what's better for my diet? Will it help us figure out what to recommend people to eat? Like, where does this go from here in the end?
That's what I hope. I think like if we're thinking of like fish oil, it's something people usually think of those capsules, right? That you can take. So if in the end maybe we figure out that, for example, maybe DHA is better for men, and ALA might be better for women.
Sure.
Maybe there is some sort of man and woman related recommendation that we can make in the future once we know more about this. And maybe this could happen, like decrease the incidence of heart disease.
Sure. Oh, that's really, really cool. So thanks for sharing. There's one question, you know, we always like to ask just as we wrap up, you know, for any maybe high school students that be watching this thinking like, oh, I'm interested in nutrition, or I'm interested in, you know, medicine and research. What kind of advice would you give to those kids sitting in class here? You know, if they're thinking about a career in research, what's made it successful for you? Where should they, what do you need to do to be successful?
Well, I think the main thing is to look for the opportunities in research because there are lots out there, and don't be afraid to go and talk to the professors about it and ask people. Don't get discouraged if you hear no's.
Yeah,
There will be no's along the way.
sure.
Just keep looking and keep trying to find. You can also, look for the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're posted, but um, I think that's the main thing. And like, if you find, go into an area that you're interested in. And then you can narrow it down later. You don't have to figure it all out in the beginning.
yeah. Well, I think that's great advice, and I think you're totally right to you know, don't be afraid to go talk to people. Like, people are interested, they love their work. I mean, you showed us that today, and everyone shows us this every week on these chats. Is you know, people are really interested and always happy to talk about what they do because it's important and interesting. And I think everyone out there watching will thank you for sharing all the things that you've been doing. That's you've kind of opened our eyes to, you know, the things we eat. You know, what is it actually doing when it goes in our bodies? And it's really cool to learn some of those new things. So thank you very much for joining us, Anne.
Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely, anytime. You've always helped us out here at the in the lab, and you're always willing to share, and we're you know, we're always grateful for that. So thanks very much, and thanks to anybody out there watching. Next week, Dana Alatab is going to join us from the Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences, share some of her PhD work that she's doing in Dr. Mike Schubert's lab. That'll be next Thursday afternoon as well. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Youth BioLab. Subscribe to the YouTube channel right now. Just click that button and you can come check out what other things we have to offer at the Youth BioLab at youthbiolab.ca. Thanks again to Anne for joining us today, and thanks to everyone out there for joining us as well. We'll see you next week.